tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Okay, so Ajahn Nisbo and I are both going to give a few reflections specifically on our experience of retreat over these last 3 months and just in general talking about retreat experience. And to start with, just maybe a show of hands. Who here has ever sat a retreat before? Either it's a one-day retreat, 3, 7, 10. All right, a lot, maybe even the majority of people. That's great. And who here joined even 5 minutes of our online Zoom sessions that went on throughout the last 3 months? All right, a lot of people as well. That's a kind of special feature of Clear Mountain. We have something which is, it's not the best name, but it's just called Zoom meditation, where we meditate on Zoom and nobody can talk. We just sit there and some people have their camera on and some people have their camera off, and people can join for however little or much of the time they want. And we slowly ratcheted up the time through the course of the last 3 months, starting out with, I think, 7 hours, and then reaching up till this past 2 weeks, we had 9 hours a day of Zoom meditation. And retreat is an interesting phenomenon. It's kind of a bizarre, almost paradox. For those of you who've been on retreat, even if it's just 3 days, you experience the full spectrum of humanity. You realize that you're a full spectrum human. Some people who've never been on retreat before, or even if you have, there still might be lodged in the mind this perception that, whoever goes on retreat, they should just be getting deeper and deeper, or more and more stable, getting more and more happiness, basically, getting better and better at jhana. And I think it's most people's experience that it's not like that. There is sukha. You do, hopefully, you sit on a retreat and you are able to, if not directly touch and sip and savor aspects and types and heights of sukha or happiness, well-being, even bodily pleasure, thrill, rapture, ecstasy that you didn't know existed, is outside of your daily limits for perception. Maybe before you did your first retreat, didn't even know a human could experience this type of thing. So hopefully people have experienced, intuited at least, that kind of well-being. But you sit, and those highs, they pass, and then they go into lows, and you experience that a human body and mind can experience levels of dukkha, types of unsatisfactoriness and pain, and that you just wouldn't have imagined, that you feel like a total wimp for even acknowledging that this is uncomfortable. It's such a weird thing. People look at you from the outside and you say, it seems like the best thing in the world. I live a job where I have to, I work all the time, and you get all this time off and you just get to sit there by yourself. And then you realize that you're by yourself and you're alone and you're not used to all of that capacity. You're not used to what you feel like from the inside. So it's weird and it's strange. And perceptions and labels really can get turned on their head. Sometimes you experience sensations, feelings, which are, is this pleasant or is this unpleasant? You can't even tell. It's like weird middle ground. Or sometimes it's so unpleasant that it's actually pleasant, or vice versa. And things flip on their head. This morning, I remembered a meme that I saw. There's a website called Sutta Central, which it's basically a Buddhist discussion group, and there's a whole thread called Skillful Memes. skillful memes. And that's a play on the word of skillful means, which is upaya. So these skillful memes. And this meme that came to mind is the first scene, two scenes. The first scene is this picture of this young boy, maybe just 8 or 9 years old. And you see it's a close-up, and he's got like a jackboot on the side of his head. And his face is just squished, just the tragedy of that. And the title is Before Retreat. In the next scene, you zoom out a little bit, and it's actually his own hand inside of the boot, crushing his own head. And that's the perspective after retreat. And hopefully you don't have to wait till after the retreat to realize how much of your own suffering and discomfiture just is self-created. It's a great formula that suffering equals pain times resistance. And when you're able to let go of that resistance, sometimes it can shift so dramatically. You're in the throes of some harrowing aspect of body and mind. And then the next moment, as you try to expand how big actually is the mind, it can be just the next moment where, wow, okay, no resistance, no problem. A lot of our teachers will talk about the perspective shift that comes about in meditation. Ajahn Amaro just spent a year on retreat and came back and gave his first Dhamma talk after a year. No SIM card, no internet, living in a very simple hut, no electricity. He talks about sitting on the porch, looks down the valley, sees this house way down the valley, and says, wow, that's really far away. And he just looks a little bit up, just a glance, looks up, and sees Sirius, the brightest star in the sky. And actually, that's a long way away. That's a long way away. That's 8.6 light years away. Actually, that light I'm seeing actually happened 8.6 years ago, and I'm just seeing it now. And then he looks a little bit of a distance, and he sees the Andromeda galaxy, 2.5 million light years away. That's a lot farther. This perspective, what is close, what is far? Lumpur Cha, our teacher's teacher, also talks about this. He would pick up like a stick, the bell ringer, and he'd say, is this short or is it long? Anybody so bold to hazard a guess? I think you know it's a trick question. You know it's a trick question. Thank you, whoever said that. Long. Well, it is super long if you're trying to pick your teeth, but it's super short if you're trying to build a wall out of it. He would, as walking around the monastery, he'd see a big boulder, and he'd ask, is that heavy? And again, trick question. He says, well, not if you don't try to pick it up. Not if you don't try to pick it up. So heavy or light, deep or shallow, short, long. Was this a long retreat, 3 months? Was it a short retreat? Is this sukha? Is this dukkha? Things flip on their head. We get so fixated on our perceptions and don't realize how much wiggle room there is. Sometimes it'll feel like, okay, there's always a little bit of wiggle room. But I love when you can take the next step, which I call waggle room. A little bit, enough to get like a dog's tail into the room of your mind. Waggle? No? Nobody else? Nobody likes that? I'm glad I said it, because I've been holding it inside for about 3 months. Good. All right. Waggle room. I wish it upon all of you. My favorite one of these shifts of perception happened when the first part of this retreat, I went on a Goenka 10-day Vipassana retreat, actually with Matt. And on these retreats, very strict noble silence. You go there and you don't talk at all. But before the retreat started, I talked with the teacher, and we realized that although he's American, he's married to a Thai woman. So we started speaking a little bit of Thai before we went hard and deep into noble silence. Didn't talk to anybody, hadn't said a word for 6 days, sitting the ups and downs of a retreat. Day 6, he decides, actually usually it was one of the retreat crew who would offer the meal, but day 6, he comes out and offers the meal. Hadn't talked to anybody for 6 days. He comes up and lifts up the first dish, which was this long tray of food, and he says, nak. He says, nak, which means heavy in Thai. And I'm like, huh? I'm trying to figure out what language is he speaking. I hadn't used my ears for 6 days. I'm like, what language? And so I say, huh? And he says, nak. And then I'm like, is this a Zen trick? And I'm thinking, okay, knock, knock. And so I say, who's there? And I think he wasn't used to talking either, because we just pretended like the whole thing didn't happen. But yeah, heavy. Are things heavy? Or are they light? And hopefully, you don't have to be a Buddhist. You don't have to be a meditator even to realize how quickly a perception can shift. But if you do learn how to be a meditator, if you learn how to meditate, to sit with yourself, you can prone yourself. You can make yourself more prone to these kind of almost graceful droppings into perspective, to spaciousness. Another sutta, I've kind of been surrounded through this retreat by one of the Buddha's disciples named Upali, who was the Buddha's barber, actually. And two suttas where he asked the Buddha for permission to go off and meditate alone. And the Buddha, in the first instance, does not give permission. This is Anguttara Nikaya 10.99, and says, "It is hard to live alone. For someone who doesn't have samadhi, isn't skilled in letting the mind collect. It is difficult to just sit with yourself. It is if the mind is stolen away." And he gives this simile. So imagine there's a bull elephant, several meters tall, and you've got a very large, supposedly deep pool. And this big elephant can go in the deep pool and just think, I'm going to play around and wash off my back and wash my ears, and just has a great time because he's a huge bull elephant and he gets a footing. Whereas then, next simile, you have a little cat or a little rabbit, and it thinks, oh, the elephant can do it. I'm going to go and wash my back and wash my ears. And it tries, and it either sinks or it floats away. So too, if we haven't trained the mind in being still, sometimes too much seclusion can be a bit much, and you either sink or get pulled away. And initially, this can seem very depressing. You're like, a cat and a rabbit are a different species from an elephant. There's no way that a cat is going to grow up and become an elephant. But fortunately, the Buddha gives another simile. He says, okay, imagine there's this baby. And when you have a little baby, they play in their poo and they play in their pee, and they just have a great time with it. Why is that? Because they're a little baby and they don't know that that's gross. But they grow up and they start playing. The examples are, they play games like somersaults and spillikins, whatever that is, and they love it because they're kids. But then they grow up and they become young men, young women, and they enjoy themselves with sense pleasures. And then they think, okay, each of these stages, you get a measure of gratification. But then the Buddha gives this full, elongated teaching about how to train one's mind, first in precepts and ethics, and then in sense restraint, and then in just being by oneself, sitting at the foot of a tree and learning how to relate to the mind's pushings, the mind's pullings, the mind's stirrings, the mind's agitation, the mind's slumpings. Certainly, if anybody joined some of those or many of those hours, I'm sure it was embarrassing for me, because I usually had my camera on, and I know there were times when I probably looked like a wet cat. Just totally slumpful. Don't even have any facial hair, and the slimy, just looking slimy on the screen. And feeling a little bit slimy at times as well. But we grow up and you learn how to sit through these things. And the second Upali Sutta is more all-encompassing. Here, this is Anguttara 7.83, where Upali comes up to the Buddha and asks, can I go to seclusion? And the Buddha says, yes. Here's a very short teaching. He says, those dhammas, those qualities, those mind states, those meditation objects of which you may know. So basically, if your meditation involves these 7 things, then you're on the right path. No matter what your object is, if it's the breath, if it's scanning, if it's making mind big, if it has these 7 things, then it is the Dhamma, it is the discipline, it is the teacher's instructions. What are those 7 things? This is a checklist for your meditation, for your Dhamma life. It is this meditation, is this mind state leading to disenchantment or unhooking, this spaciousness? Is it leading to dispassion? Is it leading to cessation, not being totally fixated? Is it leading to full knowing? Is it leading to peace? Is it leading to awakening? Is it leading to nibbana? So if it leads to these 7 things, you may definitely hold it is the Dhamma, it is the Vinaya, it is the teacher's instructions. So for me, that was my main meditation through the course of the retreat, no matter what my object, and it did change, but just any one of those, and I'll say that list again, okay? Disenchantment, stepping away, non-annoyance, dispassion, cessation, peace, clear seeing, awakening, and nibbana. Any one of those, remember any one of those, and see if your path, if your mind is tracking those things. So I wish you all well, especially the guy who said Jesus Christ. I wish you were in my hut some of those days when I was feeling like a sloppy cat, so you would have brightened my day. So I'll pass it on to Ajahn Isabel.
That cell phone chime was perfectly timed. I got to live next to Ajahn Kovili these last 3 months, and you didn't look like a wet cat very often, Ajahn. But it really is rare and a pleasure to have a monastic brother who is so aligned and willing and interested in taking that time on retreat. And it was interesting, the end note of my retreat, actually, though it ended officially yesterday, was after last Saturday, I was invited to sit with someone who had just entered home hospice and was in the process of letting go of the body. And I was with her Saturday night, and she passed away Sunday morning. And it was fascinating to come from all this bright activity at Clear Mountain, the kind of joy of a community gathering, land acquisition, AV dynamics, and other elements, and to come into a quiet room with an acquaintance that I realized I'd met many, many times in the Buddhist conception of death. And to feel his presence in the room with this beautiful being who is passing away, and her body so frail, and yet this luminosity and majesty of spirit when I was able to close my eyes and just sit with her. And I've never, I tried to say a few wise things at first, but words are so trite when brought into the space with death. And so in the end, what felt deeply meaningful was just to sit with her for 15 or 20 minutes and then chant. And watch as all these activities of the mind, all those words, revealed their frailty and the fragility. And the heart was allowed to fall back into a quiet and bright place, utterly human and humble, that lives in each of us and resonates and is not attached to personality or person or individuality. And to feel sitting across from me, breathing her final breaths, someone passing to another stage, and to see how, when it comes down to it, this is the most important thing to remember, is no matter how much our eyes get taken by the shifting visions of world, occupation, news, and so on, that in the end, what we have is the brightness of heart that accompanies us onward, this old friend death which comes and visits and makes himself known. And as each word collapses like a chair underneath us, it can feel like a betrayal until you realize all it's trying to do is bring you to sit on solid ground. It didn't look that pleasant actually in this case, but but that's what I think of retreat as, is some might look at trying to build a monastery and think, the monastics pulling back for retreat is counter to the dynamic currently at work with land search, acquisition, building. And yet it was, in my mind, deeply appropriate that during this period of moving towards finally acquiring a home for Clear Mountain and all the activity and growth, that at that exact moment, Ajahn Kovilo and I got to pull in and hold to the quiet center and remember that and understand the potency of that and home, the quiet, still axis around which the world turns and each of us turns. And some of you might know the quote or the vision that Ajahn Amaro had. I've mentioned it before, where Master Hua, a famous Mahayana teacher, came in his vision and said, "Bright, loud, and mobile is the false. Subtle and indistinct is the true." Bright, loud, and mobile is the false. Subtle and indistinct is the true. And this is the compassion of the Buddha, where he laid out a 3-month period for the monastics where we are supposed to stay in one spot, remember why we became or set off on the holy life, focus on formal practice. And this is something Ajahn Kovilo and I try to do every year. We actually try for 4 months if possible. And it's something so important for each of us as practitioners to remember that there is good to be done in the world. There are things to attend to. And yet to come back to that quiet human heart and the practice which allows it to brighten and sustain and stabilize into wisdom, luminosity, loving kindness. This is our duty. And everything ripples from there. So the reflection from retreat for me was first to emphasize again the hope that each person here, because practice, like Ajahn Kovilo said, is hard. We are, so many of us, dripping wet cats and rabbits time and again, trying to shake off. And is it okay? Wow. That's a whole different chair, I think. Okay. It's okay, yeah? 3 is a Buddhist number, so just looking at, so is 108, but 2, 3, 4. But to remember to come back to that in each of us, because when we practice day to day, it can be a bit like treading water. It's good enough, but it becomes rote. And it is really true, you want to keep a strong daily meditation practice. I find sea changes in people's practice at 20 minutes a day, 45 minutes a day, and an hour and a half a day, those key transition points. But 20 minutes a day is basic hygiene for us as practitioners. It's like brushing your teeth. And to know that it's very common to become disillusioned with that and to have difficulty. And to also remember that what practice does is it should be approached with playfulness and interest, that we can bring, that what we're doing is cultivating a skill of bringing up nourishment and joy in the heart. The Buddha said that joy leads to rapture, leads to concentration. We brighten the heart, and then it is willing to calm. And so how do we bring up joy internally? How do we access that quiet and precious gem in the heart of loving kindness and peace, and cultivate it as a skill so that we have a refuge internally and a wellspring of goodwill and goodness to give to those around us. And we have to feed less off of the world and can more radiate goodness into the world. This is what meditation is supposed to do. And if you are discouraged and have found techniques work for a time and then they do not, you are in good company. And yet to really continue trying, trust in these other aspects of the path, giving, community, faith. But take time outside of your daily life to go on a retreat or two every year if you can. Go visit a monastery. Cloud Mountain's nearby and is very affordable. They have scholarships. Abhayagiri or monasteries are completely free. And understand the importance of kind of really not giving up. Revitalize your practice because it requires that dedication. Every month you can take 1 or 2 days, if possible, maybe 3, to go pull in a little bit. Every week can you take an uposatha. But remember that if we don't give careful attention and keep our finger on the pulse of that quiet space in our hearts, it is easy to lose. The Dharma speaks to us sometimes in the voice of a lion, in those moments when a clear intuition burns in you, but so often we follow it like we would follow the trail of a deer. You have to have your eyes attentive to a quiet voice, a rustle in the bushes, in the trees, and be willing to follow that gentle onward beckoning. And that is what meditation is so essential for, is dipping below the surface into the deep waters that are still and clear. So to remember that. And just to bring the practicalities of retreat, the tools. For so long, I found that most of the meditation techniques that would be held up by my teachers really were just perceptions, mantras, or focusing breath just at the tip of the nose, which never really worked for me. And then I began to understand and become acquainted with teachings by Ajahn Jeff, Ajahn Thanissaro, Ajahn Suchito, based in Tanpur Lee, a famous Thai teacher who began exploring anapanasati from the viewpoint of the breath and the breath body that moves through these channels energetically. That pana, what is known as prana in Vedic terminology, is a subtle energy that moves through the body, and that what you can do in meditation, if you resonate with this approach, is to cultivate those energies to brightness, refinement, and a nourishing and healing quality, a wellspring of goodness and well-being that's yours and accessible regularly. And Ajahn Jeff has a great book called With Each and Every Breath around this. Systems of mapping that breath body onto our own body are very similar, whether it be Vedic or Chinese, and the Chinese system is so refined. But this retreat, I owe a great debt of gratitude actually to a teacher here named Jason Bartlett, who has a website called Luminous Dhamma, and he really gave a language to some of these things that I've been working with for a long time that was very useful. It's based in Taoist conception, but effectively moving through a process of calming the mind, allowing it to settle onto the breath slowly. And that when the awareness is brought to the breath, allowing it to settle, say, onto the tip of the nose or around the center of the heart, and that as you follow the breath, it harvests the brightness and the energy from that. And that then you can connect awareness to one of these energetic centers, whether it be the lower dantian, what the Zen called the hara, right below the navel, or if you're a woman, at least this is what Jason says, and I think he knows these things as well, is the heart dantian actually is very effective for a beginning point. And that step 2 is connecting that nourishing breath to that energetic center by focusing awareness on those sensations as you breathe and trusting that energy to gather, and you'll sense a real, potentially, sense of nourishment and a wellspring of refreshment, of nourishment, what in some Buddhist terminology is called piti. And that after staying with that for a time, just appreciating the rise and fall, and if you can't find those energetic centers, to place a finger over them to find them. That there comes a point also where that energy steams into a refined movement of almost a refined breath energy that circulates and rises and moves throughout the body and even beyond. And in that case, really relinquishing control and allowing it to circulate and open up channels. And that if you allow that, breathing the whole time, not keeping it kind of boxed in, but really trusting it to guide you, having its own intelligence, that after a time that cycle runs out, and then you come back, allow the mind to coalesce back onto the breath, harvest the energy, connect it to the relevant dantian, whether it's the lower if you're a man or the heart if you're a woman in this conception, I don't know why. Allowing that to gather and sense the pleasure coming from that, the sense of nourishment. And then that third step of allowing that to steam up again and surrendering to that healing and nourishing energy that moves throughout the body and mind. And I know that's not nearly enough to work on too much, but just cracking open a doorway, and we'll speak more about this in coming months, I think. But to say that chiefly, what is so important, I think, is to, if a technique has ceased to be relevant for you, if you find meditation to be dry, really to not give up, to look for different techniques or approaches that might be meaningful, whether it means reading Shyla Catherine's Wisdom Wide and Deep, whether Lee Brasington's discourses on the jhanas, whether it be kind of looking into Ajahn Sucitto's Breathing Like a Buddha, the book, Ajahn Amaro's Inner Listening about the sound of silence. Take time out of your lives and years as practitioners to find your way back to practice and to remember this kind of foundational pillar that most of our lives revolve around, and which, or at least can, even unintentionally, guide our lives, the quality and flavor and note of the heart, and that this is the beauty of retreat. So, just to finish by expressing deep gratitude, it's very rare in the world that you get a chance to pull in for this many months and weeks together. And we're so grateful for the community for supporting that, both in providing the requisites of food, clothing, dwellings, medicines that were needed, and by just supporting us as monks, understanding that this is a key part of our monastic life, and that for us to do our duty, we need that time. And for that understanding, we are grateful. And Ajahn Kovilo perceives structures as trellises. I perceive them as cages often. So I don't join the Zoom meditations. I like meditating alone in my kuti. But he kindly uses the royal we with, or the group we when he talks about the Zoom meditations. But I'm so grateful that they're happening and people are able to tune in that way. And yeah, as things move into a brighter and more dynamic phase with land acquisition and more, it feels right that we began with our feet on this solid ground, remembering humility, remembering the shared basis of practice, and remembering our teacher, the Buddha, and what he gave us as well on this holy life. So, sadhu, everyone, much gratitude.
Han Tamayang Tamakata Satu Karang Tadamase Satu 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 anumotami. So since Ajahns is to finish the retreat, it's good time to do the ask for forgiveness as well as last year, that new year that we're going to do this. I would like to invite
Juanita, I don't think quite yet. Q&A first. Is that correct, Ajahn? Or what are we going to do?
I thought that we don't have to give in yet. Okay. ได้ค่ะ
No, we'll do that in a second, though. Thank you, Juanita. So we do have about 10 minutes. We will finish a little early so we can do that. But we have about 10 minutes for Q&A or any questions people have. And maybe next week we are planning to do a bit of a land FAQ and Q&A. So if people have questions about land, feel free to save them for next week and we'll be able to address them in full. If you're online, you can raise your electronic hand as well.
Hello. So, as a question, on the topic of the, you might say, variation between, for example, sukha and dukkha, or perhaps kind of, in other words, the exceeding of the boundaries around what those are. This might be an odd question, but as someone who is transgender, who is non-binary, where there is that also gender fluid, and where there's that gravitation or we say variation between, for example, male and female, but also being neither of those things. I was curious if either of you had any, I guess, thoughts or words regarding that.
Sorry, say the question, please.
Oh, again? So, I guess regarding, you might say, the conception of gender or the self, or I guess variation between, say, those things. What would you have anything to say on that?
Yeah, it is interesting. In many different places from the Buddha's first sermon, he talks about there are these two extremes, and that one who, a practitioner, stays to the middle, a middle course. And specifically in that sutta, he's talking about the extreme of asceticism, just someone who is trying to prove that they're the best spiritual practitioner ever, and then just total sensual indulgence, and that the path is a middle way. But you also find this neither this pole nor the other pole, neither inside nor outside, both inside, both outside, neither. You find that either 2 points dissolved, or even the whole question just turned on its head in many ways. And it's rather amazing how in many ways the Buddha you can read his suttas and you can read his discourses, and it seems so utterly modern. You read them and you're like, how could this be on the same, spoken at the same time as these other, things written at the same time, which just seems so antiquated or out of something modern. So just an initial thought, but.
First, welcome, and I hope you feel really comfortable in this space. It's really one of the beauties of seeing how Buddhism echoes into other cultures is seeing the kind of breadth of heart and a certain progressive quality in these cultures. I find Thailand, for example, very, very open to a gender fluidity that I think is only recently being allowed into the West somewhat. And I would just say there's a balance in Buddhist thought around, on one hand, the Buddha says, by giving too much attention to the sign, by giving too much attention to the sign of the masculine externally, one strengthens the perception of the feminine internally, or vice versa. So there's an interesting thing where, on one level, there is the teaching of not self and of letting go of all labels. And on another level, that has been used unskillfully. And I think one of the really important parts of the practice is first understanding and coming to terms and really valuing our own kind of particular conditionality and shape and identity in a provisional sense, and that can be honored and held lightly while also not becoming too fixated on it. And I think, like any deep spiritual tradition, there's a paradox there that needs to be held with wisdom. But I think it can be done, and I think kind of meditation's a really beautiful way to do that. And also, I think finding that deeper storyline of spiritual practice that allows us to let go of all the surface elements of personality, even quite deep ones, and trauma and everything. And like, we step into that when we navigate the world, but then I think as we become resonant more and more and embedded in kind of a deeper sense of our own purpose as being seeking enlightenment, that there is also a robust ground to step onto when we're faced with those most stark realities of birth, sickness, aging, death, and that ultimate vision at the end. Did that land okay? Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, Mike over here. In Thailand, monastics are considered a third gender. It's something worth noting.
I was just thinking about the Bhikkhuni Samyutta, where the nun is dealing with Mara, and Mara is saying, "Who are you, woman, with your two-fingered knowledge?" And then she goes on to say, "Who are you, Mara, man or woman? It doesn't make a difference." And I can't articulate it fully. My guess is that you could. I just wanted to bring that up to maybe expand on it if you wish to. Thank you.
Yeah, great point. Encourage people, especially the Theravada. You brought up the Bhikkhuni Samyutta. There's so much. Some of the earliest, I think the earliest female poetry occurs in the Pali Canon in the Theravada selection. And yes, so many great suttas from enlightened nuns and awakened people of multiple genders. And it is fascinating. One very cool sutta, someone comes up to the Buddha and says, "Are you a god?" And he says, "No." And they say, "Are you a human?" And he says, "No." And they say, "Are you like a naga or a dragon?" And he says, "No." And they say, "Are you male?" And he says, "No." And they say, "Are you female?" And he says, "No." And then they're just totally like stumped, like, what? "So what are you?" And his answer is, "I'm awakened, I'm awake." And I think that's just the best punchline. I mean, I think that's a great thing for all of us to aim towards, So, yeah, thank you for bringing up that Samyutta.
There's an interesting paradox with theravada, where it seems we have a lot of bright lines, rules, distinctions. It's very visible. And yet, because the identity is held by that ritual and lineage, there's a huge amount of spaciousness in this space. I hope people feel that. And it's a strange, you wouldn't expect that to be the case, but some more secular traditions that have no focal point of identity beyond, say, a technique are very rigid about the technique. If you aren't practicing this technique, you can't come to a retreat. Whereas in Theravada, because we're held by the robes and the ritual and all these things, there's a huge amount of spaciousness within this form. And I like that trade-off. I think it's good. So, yeah, it can seem a bit intimidating and stark on the surface, and then you step into these circles and you realize there's a huge amount of kind of playfulness and flexibility, actually.
One more question or thought? Yeah, please, person on Zoom. From James on Zoom.
Hello.
Hey.
I finished my upasata last week. Actually, no, yesterday. And it was actually a lot better because I took Ajahns Sukar advice and didn't go too hard on myself this time about keeping the 8 precepts. But while I was on my walk, I was walking in the reservoir, I guess, near my house, and something came to me about tanha. that it was so difficult to like give up like entertainment, for example. Like we spent so much time on these TVs and internet, and I was like, is it an escape?
Yeah. No, you're totally on the right track. I mean, that's tanha, that's the second noble truth, and the job towards that is to abandon it. And your intuition is very right. I mean, I think even that term retreat, I'm going on retreat, whereas actually what you're doing when you go on retreat is just trying to stop or actually to advance, whereas what most of us are doing most of the time, that's retreat. That's the escapism. All the Netflix, all the Facebook, all the every way that you're trying to escape, and you just stop. So what James was doing right there is doing the uposatha. So once a week, maybe just try not to eat afternoon, just for one day. And it's hard. You just don't have your outlet. You can't go to the fridge. You can't go on your Netflix, give up entertainment. All the usual means for retreating from having a human body are cut off to you, and you're finally just put face to face. You're up against the wall of your own dukkha, which is the first noble truth, which when you realize that, like it sounds like you were able to, right down there, down by the river, you're able to actually see your dukkha, and that's the path, actually. So you're definitely on the right track, and you have to, the only way out is through, actually. So yeah, you're on retreat. Yesterday, those uposatthas, that's a mini retreat in the most wholesome sense, retreating towards rather than retreating from.
Yeah, and just to say, we ended a retreat at Cloud Mountain once, and someone, we said, look, when you go back into the world, things are going to speed up a lot. And this person with tears in his eyes said, I think it's the world that stopped. I think, all of us have actually been moving quickly towards something, and it's the world that stopped or has been stuck. And I think that's a really relevant point. Is one of the definitions of tanha is tatra binandini, delighting now here, now there, jumping from Netflix to food to things, and we just lose all our potency. It is appropriate you are walking in a reservoir because it's a good simile. Like we want this water to fill up in a vessel in a container which can hold it. And the problem is that we keep poking holes in it and cracks that the water all escapes. And those are the various distractions and the things that feel trivial and like a waste of our time that makes us live a life not worthy of our death. And what we want is to create a cool and sustained reservoir of water that is still enough that that surface reflects perfectly the sky, and that's wisdom. So yeah, I think it's actually a very good simile for what tanha does, is draw us away from that kind of centered spot.
Thank you, James, and thank you, everybody. We'll shift into